Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Marcus Woodard, Marketing Programs Manager here at Allego, and I just wanted to go through some housekeeping items before we get started. And as people are kind of rolling in, if you actually want to use the chat, go ahead and tell us your name, tell us where you're from, calling in today, and we'll get going with some housekeeping items here. At the conclusion of today's webinar, there is a three-question survey that helps us keep improving these events. So go ahead and fill that one out when the webinar is over. This presentation is being recorded, and an on-demand recording will be emailed usually within the next day or two. And we've reserved time at the end of today's session for Q&A. But if you did have questions during today's session, please add them in the chat or the Q&A panel in the Zoom interface. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speakers, Sean Frontz, Global Practice Leader, Sales Performance at Performance Development Group, and Tim Kasida, Strategic Partnership Director at Allego. Sean and Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Marcus. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. Let's go ahead and get started.
All right, let's jump in. And so thanks for signing in today. We're going to be with you for the next 45 minutes to an hour. However long you're here, we are going to be here. The agenda that we're going to cover today between Tim and myself, and we're both just going to kind of be going back and forth and chatting about this, as well as you adding in your questions and thoughts in the chat through Marcus as well. And we welcome those questions and chat comments throughout the entire process versus waiting till the end. And so please fire those questions in. We're going to be talking really about four things. First is evolving your onboarding program to reduce information overload. Man, talent is really hard to find. And not only is it hard to find right now, it's hard to keep. And the data on how many salespeople don't even survive the first 90 days of onboarding is really scary. And so how do we make that better? We're going to talk about using peer-to-peer learning to effectively coach. Very limiting to have the sales leader be the only coach. So how do we enable peer-to-peer learning? Third, keep frontline sellers selling. That's what they do, they sell. So how do we keep them selling and be able to focus in that world where they're doing what they need to be doing and we're coaching and training at the same time? So how do we support that continuous improvement? And then finally, how do we get our salespeople to do a better job of self-assessing their skills and performance so that they stay on top of their own development, and we're in there in kind of a supporting role or supporting structure, if you will. This is all about coaching, right? The title of the webinar was the new ABCs of sales. And so kind of a joke there, and hopefully most of you are old enough to remember, but ABCs used to be always be closing, right? There are all these euphemisms. Matter of fact, they're so prevalent. I'm drinking from a coffee cup of one of my great clients, and this was a gift they gave out at one of their conferences. And if you remember the movie Coffees for Closers, there's all these old sayings. So, hey, always be closing. Yeah, no, let's actually shift that paradigm. And let's say, let's always be coaching. And how do we create an environment where coaching is something that just is? It is and is. Everyone coaches all the time, continuously. That's what we're going to focus on. So to start, I'm going to turn over to Marcus and have him launch our first poll. We're going to do two polls today. Now, again, these things are anonymous, and so we ask you to be brutally honest in terms of them. How often are you coaching your sales reps? How often are you coaching your sales reps? So is it every day? Is it something that you always do? Is it 1 to 2 times a week? Is it 1 to 2 times a month? Is it 1 to 2 times a year? Now, again, I'm asking you to be brutally honest. We're going to share some data that's what's been collected out there in terms of the real answer to this. So we've got about 47% of you. We always aim for 80 to 90% in our participation. We're up there around 60%. Hopefully that coaching poll popped up there on your screen. All right, we're doing a lot better. Let's give it another couple seconds here. How often are you coaching your sales reps? All right, look at that, numbers growing. We're about 75%. So Marcus, why don't you go ahead and close it out and share the results with these beautiful people and take a look at that. So some interesting information there. Tim, what are your thoughts on that data? Just high level. What do you think?
I mean, it seems pretty pretty right on. Like everybody wants to coach more, but it's hard to find time to coach.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? It's of all, I've been doing this for over 20 years now, right? And for all the leaders I've met around the world, coaching is one of the things, I love what you said, Tim, that they really want to be doing, but they struggle with that idea of balancing time, because sales leadership, you know, in my, again, 20 years of history, to me, sales leadership is one of the most complex positions in the world. I mean, there's so many demands on sales leaders every single moment of every single day, and it never stops. So how do I balance that time for coaching? And so 13% of you said every day. That's awesome. What an unbelievable, maybe that's the 80-20 rule there in play. And then about 31% said 1 to 2 times a week. 44%, so the largest, the mode, if you will, was 1 to 2 times a month. And then honestly, there was 13% of you that said 1 to 2 times a year. So let's see what the data says. And so CSO Insights did a pretty groundbreaking study on sales enablement. It said coaching, of all the things we can do, think about it, sales enablement, sales operations, sales effectiveness, sales training, there's so many sales dots. Of all the things that can be done, coaching came out as the most significant performance impact. When coaching is made a prioritization, is measured and delivered, 27% improvement in win rates. That's pretty staggering. So is the next piece of information they shared in that research. By the way, anything we cite inside of here, we are happy to send out to you afterwards so you can go into depth and analyze these things. So 27% increase, but yeah. Wow, 47%, half of all sales managers spend less than 30 minutes a week coaching. Just let that sink in for a minute. When we're talking about always be coaching, this is like the polar opposite of that. Always be, I don't know, doing everything else but. So if it has by far the greatest area of improvement, the greatest capacity, but about half of us are only doing it 30 minutes a week, we've got to be able to figure out how to change something. So what Tim and I are going to do are focus on these 4 agenda topics. Again, throw out the chat and the Q&A as it comes in. Marcus is kind of watching that and will interrupt us and ask those questions as they come in. But let's think about it from the start. So this idea of onboarding, right? We got to find the talent, which is hard enough, but then we have to properly onboard them into the culture, get them up to effectiveness as quick as possible. And so when you think about onboarding, think about this, and this is a cultural shift that Tim and I and others are really focusing on. So you think about onboarding starts on day 1 and ends when? When does onboarding end? Is it a 60-day onboarding program? Is it a 90-day onboarding program? What if we created a culture where onboarding never stopped? We're pushing on a concept that we're calling Everboarding, that if you belong to the organization, from the day you join until the day you decide to leave the organization, whether you retire or go on to greener pastures, we onboard you, because it's from the start into a sales position. And then from there, you're handpicked for one of the best in terms of high potentials. And you're put into an onboarding for future leadership. And then you earn that promotion, you become a leader, and there's onboarding for the leadership. And then when you get the opportunity to be a leader of leaders, it's an onboarding, and it never stops. Why? Because we never stop growing. And so what if we actually changed it? Then onboarding was a commitment to the individual forever. And so, Tim, what are your thoughts about this idea of kind of everboarding and really pushing on this idea of onboarding and just changing it?
Well, 2 things. One, this idea of everboarding is really important, and an agility around that kind of everboarding concept in being able to continually monitor the process and where the sales team needs help, and to, in an agile fashion, kind of insert that, next training. And even if it's, 2-minute video, it's still something that helps the reps to be continually engaged. The second thing is, what we're seeing more and more in our customer base at Allego is folks starting the onboarding process pre-start date. So enabling folks to look at customer case studies, to meet their peers virtually through the platform, to start absorbing kind of what's important in their role even before they start on day one.
So I love it, Tim. I'm pushing onboarding later and creating Everboarding, and you're pushing it earlier, calling it pre-boarding. And so it literally is almost from application to retirement or leaving the organization. It's the life of the individual with the organization. And this is such a differentiating factor. We have a client down in the Houston market, and they're in the medical field. They run about 7 clinics in the Houston market. And talent in that world is really, really, really hard to get your hands on nowadays. And they took this concept so far that they actually changed one of the values of their organization. And they went to market saying, we will invest in you so much as an employee here that if we don't have the next position available inside of our organization, we'll help you find it outside of our organization. And people started to attach to that and really come into their organization. And so how do we just kind of rethink this idea of onboarding from before to ongoing and after? And second is this idea of coaching the coaches, right? And so when you become a sales leader the first time, or you earn the right to be a leader of leaders, or eventually become the chief sales officer, how much coaching do those people do, right? And so how do I become effective at coaching if I myself am not receiving coaching? And so again, when you look at the data, it's really, really, really pretty scary. And so let's find out, again, second poll, Marcus, if you can launch the poll, how much are you as a leader receiving coaching? Now, we got a lot of different people on the line today. So if you're not a direct sales leader that should be receiving coaching, answer this question through the lens of what you believe about your system and your culture inside your organization. So again, if you are a leader and you should be receiving coaching, answer it honestly. If you're not a leader and you're in sales enablement or sales performance yourself or any other role, then answer it based on what you believe about your culture.
There's a couple of questions in the chat we should get to at some point, maybe after the poll, or we can do it in parallel.
Tim, yeah, go ahead. While they're filling out the poll, go ahead, Tim.
Sure. There are a couple of questions around, like, how do I really, start to onboard, given labor laws, et cetera. What we're seeing, and honestly, I can't speak to labor laws, but what we're seeing is folks setting up basically a microsite, if you will, with information for the soon-to-be employee that, there's no requirement that they start consuming it, but we know those folks that are hungry in the sales world are going to go and consume as much as they can prior to day one.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you say, I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, right, Tim? Can't get into the labor law discussion, but what can you do not pushing anything with the labor laws, right? Introducing them to the culture of the organization, having a handwritten letter go out from someone high in the organization and welcoming them into the culture. And so those are the kind of things that I think would be involved in that, not pushing on those labor laws. So let's take a look at the results here. And so again, pretty wild. 2% of you said every day. That's probably one person, literally. One person gets it every day. And then you see 1 to 2 times a week is about that 80-20 rule, right? And so those are the best of the best, get it 1 or 2 times a week. That's what we're aiming for, right? The 80% is pretty evenly divided between 1 to 2 times a month. And look at this, 39% of people said it's 1 to 2 times a year, yet I'm supposed to be a good coach. So how am I supposed to be a good coach to my people if I'm not getting good coaching? And that's the pressure that is constantly put on to sales leaders. And so when you think about it, again, look at it from a standpoint of looking at the data. And so Tim, why don't you address this one here? This is pretty crazy.
Yeah, so obviously 73% of sales managers, aligned with the data aren't getting the training they need. We're seeing this changing in a couple of ways, or we're seeing opportunities to change this in a couple of ways. One is by enabling more asynchronous coaching, if you will, so that it's not always a face-to-face requirement, which is difficult to schedule. The second point, and I guess this is just an observation, we're seeing some of our customers like Novartis really make an effort during first line manager training to bring second line managers into that training process, enabling the second line and first line managers to collaborate, getting to know each other, starting to deliver some of that coaching even through training, so that it's building more of that culture of manager training.
Yeah, I love it. Again, pushing on that culture, right? We coach, it's what we do. And so when you make that growth and that step from being an individual contributor to being a first level leader, you're surrounded by that culture. I love that from that organization. And so second thing we're going to push on is this idea of peer-to-peer, right? The coach, the sales leader, the leader of leaders can't be the pinch point, right? They can't be the only source for this ability to always be coaching. And so how do we involve this idea of peer-to-peer learning? A couple things to think about. Find each team member's strength, right? And maximize that for the benefit. Mercy is our vice president of marketing at Performance Development Group. And this is just a nugget that she shared with me recently that really was some crazy thinking to me. And what she said was that if you're working on something and it's been more than 15 minutes and you're still having a hard time getting it done, find out whose skills and talent that is and ask them for help. And when she said that, I was thinking about Excel and sometimes having to manipulate Excel spreadsheets, or for some people, it's PowerPoint and designing the customer presentation. And you can fight your way through it, but man, by the time you're done, you're just burnt for the day. And so what are the given strengths of every single member of the team? Some people are really, really, really effective at peer coaching and coming alongside of, and others are learners. They just want to go sell. That's what they do. And so those that want to just go sell, don't make them be coaches. But those that excel in it, find that out and partner them with other people. So find out the strengths of each person and really maximize that for the betterment of the whole. Second, man, there's some heavy learning out there, right? And so take some of that heaviest content and make it asynchronous. And Tim, this is something you can talk to, that you deliver it in a way where I can digest it on my own, right? There's video, there's reading, there's different things, different ways that people learn. But don't make me sit in a classroom, because again, for many salespeople, that's death for them. They want to be out there in the field selling and being engaged with their customers. In the days of putting people in a room for 2 or 3 days in a row to do training, it's just too heavy in today's reality. So let them digest some of that kind of on their own asynchronously. And then we in my organization, we use this idea called 5 minutes of learning. And every time we have a sales meeting and it's spread out amongst the entire team, the very first thing we do is turn it over and we'll be like, hey, Tim, you're up today. Give us 5 minutes of learning. And it's something that week in the moment, live, real world, that you found insightful. Sometimes it's an article that was read. Sometimes it was how you handled an objection. Recently in our organization, it was an email that someone sent out that we thought was really cool, the way that they worded it. And 2 people in our organization actually got that email. And so we kind of looked through it and digested it. But it's that on demand, in the flow of work, just really quick bursts. Tim, what else would you say here in terms of leveraging our peers?
Well, what we're seeing is, and I'm not sure if the next slide talks to this or not, but what we're seeing here is, especially today in the med device industry, folks really focusing on proactively enabling this peer-to-peer learning. And there's tons of research out there, Serious Decisions, talking about how really leading organizations facilitate in-field observations, on-the-job informal learning, and peer collaboration. And back to kind of what we're seeing across our customers, but again, I'll say this really started with our medical device customers, in that they've been looking at kind of A players, B players, and C players, and looking for opportunities to make B players A players and C players B players, and have documented really remarkable improvements, 41% of, transitioning C players to B players, which is amazing. And they're doing that, partially COVID has helped with this. In-field observations now can really be Zoom observations, and the prevalence of being able to record customer conversation is really making that ability to observe and learn from others and maybe chop kind of best practices out of some of those recordings and publishing those out to the team. And that really kind of facilitates this on-the-job informal learning, right? If I'm pushing out those best practices, I'm giving my users a reason to come into the system every day. And then additionally, for peer collaboration, I want to make it really easy for them to ask a question to their peers, to maybe create a little video of a deck they're going to present and ask them to comment on that deck, so that they're learning right through their peers.
Yeah, and Tim, your Allego platform is right on the cutting edge of using AI inside of those video libraries, right? Where it can actually begin to kind of analyze what the content is of the video and then deliver it to people based on their needs. Is that correct?
Absolutely. These kind of 3 bullets, in some ways kind of sum up the platform, in that we can enable people to practice with their manager. We enable folks to capture recorded calls. We enable this on demand, if you will, informal learning of those best practices, win stories, et cetera. And then, peer collaboration is just right in the nature of what we do. That's
awesome. Imagine the word. I mean, I love how you acknowledge that, COVID's done a lot of bad things for us, but the ability to now be in this platform where you've got sales leaders who have markets that are several states, and my ability to go on a ride along with you was limited to once every couple months when I'm in your state or in your major market. And so now in this platform, and then as you said, the use of videos, I can look at it from a standpoint of saying this idea of always be coaching. We always push our customers to think about, what is the single most important meeting you've got next week? Look at your entire calendar. What's the single most important client-facing meeting? And imagine using your technology now where you can actually video record, just sitting here in my home office, my opening statement, and then send that off to my leader to say, hey, this is that meeting I've been dying for. This is how I'm going to open. Can you give me some thoughts on that? It just changes everything from that idea of always be coaching. And so third thing we're going to talk about today is this idea of keep them selling, right? That's what they do, is they sell. They've got a drive for performance. But at the same time, we have to help kind of promote this continuous improvement. And so, Tim, you had some data you wanted to share with this one as well.
Yeah. So what we're seeing in this regard is, one, in terms of continuous improvement, it really is important to have visibility into the sales process to see where folks are getting stuck, and then enabling bite-sized information at the rep's fingertips to close that gap, if you will. And some of our customers, including Nuveen, really made some strides in this area in each of those bottleneck areas. And one's going to come up today, if you will. They're going to go out and they're going to interview the sales force to see what subject matter expert, what exec, what salesperson is really the most equipped to talk about that. And then they'll record that person talking about how to solve that problem or to perform that best practice themselves. And that's what's really enabling this kind of continuous evolution.
Yeah, I love it. And that links right back to knowing your strengths, right? Who do we have? Who's best at this? And how do we record that and get that out to the masses instantaneously through the advancement of technology? And so I love that. Again, this idea of frequent, constant in the flow of work, right? So as we say, keep the seller selling. The idea of pulling them out for 2 or 3 straight days versus giving them that bite-sized 3-minute video, a quiz using AI platforms to keep challenging them and keep them growing, keep them in the flow of work doing what they do best. And so how do we maximize the technology stack to be able to do that? Delivering those bite-sized chunks, right? 3 or 4 minutes at a time so that I can just get it first thing in the morning, get the learning in, and then get on with my day. And then I love this idea of skilling and drilling, just like the pros, right? And so it's always been, again, I've been doing this for almost 21 years. And it's always been one of the most curious things to me that, and Tim, I don't know your experience, but if you say to most salespeople, and I've been selling my whole entire life, if you say to most salespeople, hey, let's do some role play. Those 2 words are like 2 of the worst words in the world for salespeople. It's like, role play, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to practice. And so, but if you think about any given profession, like think about any sports, think about musicians, think about, first chair violinists in an orchestra, they practice. That's what they do all the time, everywhere, continuously skilling and drilling to get better. And so being able to partner with an organization like Allego to map those things out and be able to deliver kind of in the flow of work in a continuous process. Tim, talk to me a little bit about with what you're seeing in terms of these kind of 3 bullets here.
So a couple of things. One, that practice obviously Allego really supports that, and our customers are typically all over practice. But for those folks that shy away from practice, it's really showing them what good looks like and making that available to them so that they can get more comfortable practicing and kind of sharing their experiences and their ideas with the broader team. So sometimes it is kind of a crawl, walk, run approach to it all. To the comments around in the flow of work, we all know that today there are too many platforms that the sales reps need to go to. So one, we all need to be thinking about kind of platform consolidation, and always thinking about how to make that more in the flow of the sales reps' work. And one of the things that jumped out to us over COVID is that we still found during COVID, 45% of our customer base sales reps access the platform via mobile, right? So even though they might have been stuck in and around home, they still found it more convenient. Maybe they wanted to go on a walk to engage, etc., engaging through mobile in what their new flow of work was.
Yeah, that's so funny, Tim. You said that. Real world, you can't make this stuff up. I sat this morning. Some people were referring to these as our cages. Tim, it looks like you're actually in an office. I'm not in an office, right? And I had a salesperson say, man, I just want to get back out. He's like, this is my cage. And so I think about the fact I spend a lot of time inside this room. And this morning I got up, made a cup of coffee, and sat on my back porch with my cell phone. And this is the first time I've ever done this, and booked a flight. And so it's that idea of being able to use mobile to just get out. And so, yeah, I could sit here, but I'm here enough. And so using the technology stack, enabling the mobile aspect of it and maximizing that is just huge. And so last thing we want to hit upon is this idea of, again, always be coaching. How do we have the sales reps do this self-assessment where they actually learn to coach themselves more often? And so a couple of things to think about. And the first is that highly effective coaching is about the rep learning to coach themselves. And so think about going on that ride along if you're in that capacity, or think about being able to observe a sales rep live in a meeting. Maybe you're in that meeting, or watching a recording of it. And so often the sales leader will just jump in with the coaching. So Tim, I like this, and this is what I think you should focus on. And we just pour into them our thoughts. And it's almost like if you knew what I knew, Tim, you'd be better. So let me tell you what I know. What we find to be really effective is letting the sales rep self-assess first, right? Most of the time, if I don't do something well, I know that. Thank you. I don't need you to tell me that. So let them kind of diagnose the call. Hey, what do you think went really well? What were your strengths in that call? And then if you have something to add it in. But most of the times they're going to nail those things that you were going to say anyways. And when it comes from them, it's way more effective than hearing it from you, especially on the second part. And where'd you get stuck? What do you think didn't go as well as you really would have liked it to have gone? Because I know that internally, I know when he asked me that question, my face turned red. I got kind of defensive. I didn't know really where to go. And I just didn't handle that objection really well. And when I learned to self-diagnose that versus you telling it to me, I'm better off for it. So how do we train them to train themselves to self-diagnose? And then second is this idea of creating a coaching culture. We talked about it a little bit in the very beginning, to not limit coaching to be something that leadership does. But what if this idea of always be coaching became pervasive as a culture? Coaching is up, coaching is down, coaching is sideways, coaching is in the organization, it's out of the organization. As I always say, coaching is and is. It's what we do. If you and I are in a call together, when the call's over, I expect him to give me some feedback because that's what we do. And it's the idea of always be coaching and taking that to the level of everyone, not just leadership. So Tim, some final thoughts as we wrap this up and go into Q&A. What are your thoughts on that?
So a couple things. One, you talked about one of the challenges with face-to-face coaching, which is getting interrupted, right? Like the rep never gets their opinion or pitch out because they're getting interrupted. And we find, our customers find, that utilizing asynchronous coaching is really advantageous to eliminate that and kind of enable that whole process. One, kind of enable the rep to practice and then to get coached. In terms of this idea of self-assessment, obviously be transparent, right? Tell the reps how they're being evaluated, show them the scorecard if there is a scorecard. So make that really clear. And then enable the technology around this. So AI can support coaching and give insights to the reps even before they might present something back to a manager. So leverage that AI in recorded calls or in practice sessions. The recorded calls, obviously, in enabling organizations to record actual game tape and analyze that game tape and then capture the best nuggets from that game tape to effectively coach other people on their own time, right, by grabbing a best practice. Yeah. Those are some of my my thoughts, and starting to share those best practices really start to build that culture of coaching where reps will start to be a little more proactive. Again, it's crawl, walk, run. Some are going to latch onto it quickly and others are going to take a little bit longer. Yeah. In summary, Sean and I are really seeing the value in this Everboarding process, starting it as early as possible, facilitating this peer-to-peer collaboration and sharing, whether that's peer-to-peer with managers, peer-to-peer with reps, some combination of the two, and really making it easy for folks. Don't over-engineer it. Make it really easy for folks to share insight, share information, and access that information in their moment of need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. Tim, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, we said, the idea of like skilling and drilling like the pros. You referred to the tape. And as soon as you said that, I was thinking about watching NFL or a college game day. And, you likely have one of the top performers in the known world out there on the field when you've got an NFL level quarterback out there. And if they have a 3rd and out and, there's a pass that's supposed to happen and the catch isn't made and they go to 4th down and the punter comes on, when you said they go to the tape, I'm thinking about watching that quarterback go immediately to the sidelines with the quarterback coach in the iPad or the Microsoft pad and watching that play instantaneously. What went wrong? Execution didn't happen. Let's get better. And so I love that idea of using the recording, because the recording doesn't lie, right? I can't say, no, I didn't do that. Be like, hey, let's watch the tape. And so I love that thinking. Marcus, any thoughts from you in terms of questions that are coming in? We'd love for you guys to just put some questions into either the Q&A or into the chat. Marcus is going to help us answer those. Tim and I are really done from a standpoint of what we wanted to talk to you today about, this idea of always be coaching, the new ABCs of selling. And we're here to answer questions. So if you've got a question or a thought, go ahead and drop it into either the chat for everyone to see, or if you want to put it into the Q&A, Marcus will be monitoring that and coming out to us. And so as we wrap up and do the Q&A, I know Allego's got some stuff there. Tim, real quick, the Allego giveaway, what do you guys got going on there?
We've got an asset that we found very helpful for sales and sales enablement organizations, and you can just take a picture of the code and access it.
Yeah,
I actually added both resources to the chat so they can quick link or take a picture of the QR codes on the screen. We did have a couple questions come in. If you guys are ready for some Q&A,
Sure.
If you haven't actually submitted a question, you can do so through the chat or the Q&A tab. And let's get going here. So we've got one from Linda. Any insights on coaching for high value B2B enterprise sales?
Yeah, I'll take that one. And then Tim, you can add some things. So when you say high value, I just love that language, like versus low value, right? And so we want to have that high value B2B. And so what I love in coaching at that level, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is, and one of the questions came in the chat as well that this kind of addresses, is we don't always have a chance to be coaching, right? And so when it's always be coaching, I can't coach everyone all the time. And so I think about it from the standpoint of saying to each one of my reps that I may be responsible for, hey, I expect this level of preparation, not for every single meeting you have next week, but maybe your top 2 or 3 meetings, because you're hopefully very busy. You're doing the right movements. And so you might have 10, 15 client-facing meetings this week, especially now that we're in this Zoom world and the travel's changed. And of those, like, what are the top 2 or 3? And here's the level of expectation for preparation, right? We always talk about 80% preparation, 20% execution. And then on a weekly basis, getting into a rhythm with each rep of coaching that top 1. And so you've got one meeting that kind of rises to the surface as probably the most significant meeting of your week. Now, it could be the final positioning for the sale, and you think this is it, they're going to sign the contract today. Or it could be on the polar opposite end of that. I finally got this person to talk to me, and this is the very first time I'm going to speak to them. But being able to coach in that moment to the most important, I love how, I think it was Jenny in the chat said, or someone in the chat said, you can't coach everything, right? And so it was Louisa said, you can't coach everything. So how do you prioritize it? That's the way I look at it. Tim, would you add anything to that in terms of high value?
I love that, Sean. And given today's world, every single meeting, maybe kind of bar 1%, has some virtual component to it. There's somebody that's going to be remote at the meeting, even if you're facilitating a face-to-face session. And given that, I would say leverage technology. Start consuming these recordings, identifying kind of the good and bad phrases to look for in these calls, and then let the technology help you identify the weaknesses that need to be addressed, right? So Sean's kind of right on, like focus on those high value opportunities and then share what's learned with the rest of the team. But I'd say also leverage the technology to help you make that job easier in terms of identifying the good and the bad, and then focusing your attention on those folks that aren't as strong based on what the technology is telling you.
Yeah, Tim, again, we could just riff on this forever, but you just made me think about the idea of bringing several people together at the same time to do some of that coaching and recording it, right? Because when I actually listen to you, Coach Marcus, it's not even on my deal, but I'm picking up those golden nuggets because I heard Marcus do his opening statement that way. You receive that coaching, and I'm getting the coaching vicariously. So whether we record that and send it out to the masses or do it in a team environment, it's that ability for everyone to be receiving that coaching. And I love that. Linda also had a second question there in her chat. It was about what about how to work with key executive players? And so, Linda, I'm going to assume that's on the buyer side. So how do we work with the key executives on the buyer side, not on our own selling side? And to me, a couple of different things that we think about is how, when you're dealing with an executive, time is their limiting factor, right? We're all busy, but when you get to that executive level, I literally do not have time to waste on anybody. And so when we're thinking about it from that standpoint, if it's early on and you're trying to get their attention, we talk a lot at Performance Development Group around what we call provocative insights. It's one of the things we focus a lot on. You can't just reach out and say, hey, or share a piece of information. You have to come up with something that kind of stops them in their tracks to say, wow, you know what, that's actually different. That's really, you know what, I'm actually engaged with that. And so how do we really focus on understanding the market, understanding the changes in the marketplace, and be able to create a reason why they should engage with us, not buy from us, that's way down the line, but create a reason why they should engage in a conversation with us. And that's in the very beginning. And then as you go through the sales cycle, it is literally getting hyper-focused on execution of sales meetings. And it's one of the things we do a lot of work with, again, at Performance Development Group, where, a lot of times when you ask the people on the other side of the table, they'll tell you that wasn't really that effective of a meeting for them. I'm sure you probably got what you got, but I'm not sure I really got anything more than I could have got from your website. And so how do we maximize the time of the executive? And it's not always by telling them something. Sometimes it's by asking them some very intriguing questions that you wouldn't even know how to ask that question if you really didn't understand the marketplace. And so I love that focus in on executives, how things change.
Sean, two things. One, Dave has a question that I think you can answer, but give me a minute to respond to Linda for a second regarding her follow-up. Linda, what I think Sean's right, kind of in thinking about those high value opportunities and assessing those and coaching to those and then sharing those best practices. We are also seeing a prevalence of teams that might, include a manager, somebody from sales enablement rallying around key deals to be able to, one, increase the probability of a win. And we know coaching is going to, increase that by 27% or so, but then also the capturing of those insights so that the rest of the team can learn.
Yeah, I love it. Again, it's that back to coaching, right? Always be coaching. Tim, I think we named this webinar appropriately from that standpoint. So we got a good question in here from Dave and a clarification from Linda. Let me attack Dave first. And so again, Tim and I are here until the top of the hour. So the more questions you ask, the more we'll just kind of riff on this stuff. Great questions here. Dave says, do you subscribe to the sandwich theory? I love this. Start with a positive, identify the single most important area for improvement, then close with another positive. Dave, let me answer that very succinctly. I believe in feedback. That's what I believe in. And I believe most people aren't really good at it. I had an opportunity recently to attend a meeting. I was actually there in a consulting capacity, and I did my part, and then I was able to stay afterwards because I knew it was going to be high value. And it was a major business, multi-billion-dollar business. And they had kind of the top echelon of their future leaders, kind of high potential leaders there. And they had the executive of their board of directors come in, chairman of the board, and kind of address them. Really neat guy, an elder statesman for the organization. And he just shared with these future high potential leaders his thoughts. And one of the things he said, Dave, was about your question here. And I thought it was really insightful. He said one of the keys that he learned early on, and obviously did very well, and now he's chairman of the board of a multi-billion-dollar organization, is he said, you have to get really good at really hard conversations. Let me say that again. You have to get really good at really hard conversations. And so feedback sometimes is really difficult. Now, the sandwich theory, I'm going to go with like maybe a double stuff or some kind of analogy with that, because one of the things I think about with the sandwich theory is I think most of us, and I'm going to say us because I fall into this world, don't give enough positive reinforcement. I think we think a lot of times about stuff, but we don't directly say it, or we just give Tim a pat on the back and be like, hey, attaboy. That's not feedback. And so, direct feedback in both a positive kind of reinforcing and also in a, this is going to be a tough conversation, but I care enough about you that I can't not say this to you. And so let's get better at all that in terms of feedback. Anything on that, Tim, before I go to Linda's question?
No, good.
Yeah,
Go for
absolutely.
it.
I just want to give you a chance to weigh in. Linda, love the clarification on the high value, meaning costs a bunch to buy. So when we get into those situations, again, it's, I always talk about a couple different thoughts around that is when you say lots of people and high value, it's getting into a couple thoughts around, the players. Who are the players, and making sure that the players are aligned to players. And so there's a lot of different things out there in terms of technology to help you map out the deal and understand who the real players are, who your advocates are, know who your adversaries are, know who the decision makers are, and really making sure that we're mapped well to them, right? And so am I having to reach out to the owner of my organization and saying, hey, I need this connection with Tim, but I don't think it's me. I think I'm all that in a bag of donuts, but I think this might be bigger than me. So I really need you to reach out, and making sure that we're really well connected throughout the entire organization. So that's one thing. And then secondly, is I always think about this idea of a fair value exchange. And it's something I've focused on for years. When I am selling you something that's of high value, what I need to be able to create in you is a fair value exchange. What is it that I'm giving to you more than just the product or the service? Because many times they don't want the product or the service. They want what they believe that's going to give to them. And it's having a much deeper strategical business conversation with business people that really understand the exchange of value, so that when I put my price tag on the table, Linda, I don't know your price point, but let's say it's, let's say it's a $2 million deal. For some of you, you're like, I've never even seen one of those. Other you're like, that's really cheap. And so we got a lot of different variants on here. But when I put a price tag on it, 2 million, you don't have kind of shock and awe going, oh my gosh, Linda, I didn't want to buy part of your company. I just wanted this service. That by the time I get to the point of putting that price out there, I have established that fair value exchange where you say, you know what, I'm getting this, and that totally makes sense to me. Now, I'm going to negotiate. We're still not done, but the value exchange makes sense. And so what we find a lot of times, what I found in 20 years of doing this, is that a lot of salespeople aren't good at creating that value exchange. They're good at selling their product and service. So how do I get much, much, much better earlier on to establish that fair value exchange? By getting out of kind of the bits, bytes, speeds, and feeds, and the features and benefits, and really understanding business person to business person, what are your goals and objectives in this purchase, and really being able to put a dollar and cents to that. So that's how I would kind of answer that question, Linda. Again, if you want to clarify, keep bringing that in. Tim, any thoughts on that, or have you seen anything else in the Q&A or chat you wanted to address?
So well said, Sean. And I see a couple things, and Marcus, help keep track of this. But I see a question from Jenny that you might want to respond to after maybe I respond quickly to Yolanda.
Okay, go for it.
So Yolanda, I think it's definitely a best practice to get takeaway information at the end of a meeting. I would strongly encourage not only kind of what the takeaway is, but what are the objectives for the next meeting, and putting that on the calendar before hanging up that call.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. From their point of view, right? Not from ours. Because again, I am not calling the kettle back. I've been in sales forever. If we really listen to our egos, salespeople want the sale. But what does the customer need in this next meeting? Because we might be especially if you go back to the example of a high value sale, we might be 7 meetings away from signing a contract, but the client has a specific need in this meeting. And so how do we really begin to focus on that? Thanks for calling out Jenny's question here. Jenny says, do you have any suggestions for onboarding structure? Yes, we do, Jenny. It's one of the 3 things that we do really, really, really well at PDG. And so from a standpoint of the structure, and as I love what she says, it seems most companies have a very heavy onboarding for 4 weeks. Again, I love Jenny pushing on the idea that I was going with Everboarding, and then Tim added in pre-boarding. And so how do we expand that like an accordion? Because again, some of the data is showing that it's so heavy, Jenny, to your point, that people are leaving. And so, man, we're just doing a really ineffective job of understanding how to appropriately onboard someone in more of a long-term kind of in the flow of work, and really establishing partners and enablement to be able to make that more effective. And so we've got some white papers and things like that. Jenny, reach out and we can talk to you a little bit more about that in terms of how we look at onboarding structure. And again, kind of back to what Tim was saying, maximizing the technology stack to help you do that, right? And so there's a lot of things we could talk about with that.
And I would double down on that. Make the onboarding process as brief as you can, but providing folks the knowledge of where to get that next level of insight, so that it's not all over that 4-week period of time or 8-week period of time, because people aren't going to remember it anyway. Better to give them the tools to be successful in terms of where the information resides when they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember reading in a book, it'd be like, it's always, Tim, I'm going to show my age. And so I think sometimes we show our age, that I'm like remembering the day. There was a time a long time ago, and I'm not sure where it is now, but I remember that there was an organization that was very, very, very prideful in the customer service experience that they offered their customers. And back in the day, this was probably 20 years ago, it was 90 days before you ever got to face a customer. That's how much they invest in you, because that moment you represent a $1 billion company, and you are the company at that moment. And so I think about, the investment that went in back then, and how do we begin to go back to that time where it's not a really heavy 4 weeks and we just dump stuff on you where we end up overwhelming you, to going more to that pre-boarding, that onboarding, and then that everboarding approach from that standpoint.
Yeah.
Anything else? Marcus, you see anything else in the Q&As? Eric had something in there and then said we answered it from that standpoint.
Yeah, there was a couple other, a few back. Jenny also asked, how many times a week would you suggest to coach? And would you prefer coaching in a team or individual meetings?
Yeah. As often as possible, right, is the way I look at it. That's why I said always be coaching. And so again, I think a lot of times we look at it through the lens, if I'm a sales leader, how often am I coaching my reps? And, we've worked with teams, and I love, somebody mentioned something about budget in there again, and there are realities, right? I was with an organization where the sales leader had like 26 reps. I'm like, man, if you coached one a day, you can't even give them all in a month. And so how do there are limitations if we think about coaching in a one-on-one environment with me, the leader, to you, the rep. But if we change it, where we're looking at, again, as Tim was mentioning earlier, using, video and AI, so that we're really embracing this idea of always be coaching, I think it changes the question, because we look at it from a standpoint of developing a culture. This is from the top down, a culture that says we get better. That's what we do. And it is from the top down. And so I coach my peer. And so if I've got an ability where, I'm looking at my most important meeting today and my leader's not available, that I can reach out and say, hey, Tim, can I share some thoughts with you about this meeting and just get you to poke on it? Because if we limit it to being the leader, man, that's really going to be really hard to answer that question, because there are so many responsibilities put onto sales leaders. So how do we change the game to create a culture where we coach all the time? Go back to that idea of 5 minutes of learning. Every sales meeting, every single sales meeting is a coaching opportunity. It doesn't have to be the leader. It could be someone that got handed a really, really hard objection, and maybe they didn't answer it well. And so I bring it up to my team and be like, guys, I got slapped in the face today, and I don't think I responded well. How would you respond if a customer said this? Or it could be, I was actually really well prepared because of some coaching, and I handled it really smoothly, and it just opened up the dialogue. And I want to share that with you in terms of how I handled it. And so I'd say let's change the game to coach everywhere all the time, up, down, sideways, inside out. It's what we do. We get better.
And so, in that, think about asynchronous coaching, what that can do for you. Think about how to share insights from coaching sessions where you're effectively coaching without being kind of face-to-face, if you will. And then think about how to build this culture of peer coaching.
Yeah. Yeah, Tim, I love it. And it's going back to that idea of it really enabling video, right? And now I'll tell a very humbling story for myself. I was receiving some coaching. I think everybody should have a coach. I was doing some executive coaching with an executive one time, and we spent the first 2 sessions kind of trying to understand what would happen if his people found out he had a coach. I'm like, why are we focused on this? Like, have a coach, have several coaches. Again, it goes back to that idea of always be coaching. Well, I was getting some coaching, and I was doing a webinar like this, and I was setting up an exercise, and it was the first time I'd ever set up this exercise, and it was recorded. And so I reach out to the person that's coaching me, and I'll never forget this woman. She was such a blessing in my life. She says, you know, do you realize it took you 8 minutes to set that up? I was like, no, it did not. The 8 minutes of like to set up an exercise? She's like, yeah. I'm like, there's no way. And she literally said to him, she's like, let's watch the tape. So we went to that part of the recording and watched it. And I was just so humbled because I had not set that exercise up before. I probably wasn't practiced enough. And I kept repeating things, and it took 8 minutes. I was like, wow, man, is there some learning for that? And then what you're saying is taking that nugget and giving it to everybody, right? And so from that standpoint, the use of video, and again, back to that enabling the technology stack, really begins to change this.
Yeah.
Anything, man, we still got 40 people in here. This is awesome. And so we love the fact that you've been so engaged today. Marcus, any final questions or thoughts?
Yeah, we got 2 minutes left. I've got one from Louisa, but you may have touched on this, but I'll just ask it anyway.
Please.
You cannot coach to everything, right? How do you prioritize what to coach? Thing is, do you use the self-assessment and go from there?
Yeah, I love assessments, right, Louisa? And there's so many of them out there. And so you've got things from DISC personalities and strengths finders and so many different things for self-assessment to know. I love Marcus Buckingham was the first person who ever said, know your own strengths. Like, why do we try to make people do something that's not natural to them versus taking their strengths and maximizing it? That's one of the things we said in terms of enabling kind of peer-to-peer. Is find out what the strengths are of the person and be able to focus on that. And at times, again, back to that idea of having really tough conversations, there's times where your role actually requires something of you, and it might not be one of your strengths, but if you're going to be in this role, then I have to actually figure out how to coach you on that. And so I look at it from the standpoint of sometimes asking very powerful questions. Just literally asking, if you look at the last week or two of your performance, what is something that you wish you could have or should have done better? And having them do that self-assessment, you tell me what you're struggling with the most. Doing that video feedback, we're able to watch and see them struggle. One of the things we see most often is responding to tough objections. Ego kind of puffs up, I get defensive. It becomes a tit for tat. Man, that's not the way to handle objections. And so I watched, and therefore I know how to focus on that. And so I'm going to push back to that idea of, yeah, use some self-assessments. There's lots of assessments, or self-diagnosis to just find out what is the single thing right now that you know you should be doing more or less of that you're not. Most people can answer that question. Let me give you some coaching around that, because we will create excuses for it. Well, I know I should be doing some more, proactive filling of the pipeline, but I'm not. And so from that standpoint, we look at it through that lens. So I think we're at the top of the hour, man. Again, so thankful for you guys for sticking with us. Thanks, Tim and Marcus, for helping us put this on. Thanks, Mercy, for all of her work in terms of this. You got some takeaways there. Again, anything inside of here that we referenced in terms of data sets, let us know, reach out to us, and we're happy to send you the links to where those are. I think Marcus put these things in there. Marcus, Tim, any final words from you before we let these beautiful people go?
No, I would say thanks so much for your time and questions, and let us know how we can help. Dave, I know you entered a question in late, but Sean and I will put our heads together and see what we can get you.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week and happy selling.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.